So good morning. As everyone enters the room, please make sure that you go to the chat and sign in with your full name and the organization that you're with. And I'll give another second or so everyone can come in, start filling up that chat. And then it's my pleasure to introduce the panel today for the session on rethinking writing assessment. And I'd like to introduce Dr. Jim Booth. Jim, if you want to raise your hand. Jim Booth coordinates upper level business writing at UMGC. He holds a Doctor of Arts from the University at Albany, SUNY, in creative writing and writing pedagogy. He is the author of 3 works of literary fiction, 2 novels, and a short story collection. He has published articles and done conference presentations on Jane Austen, the writing process, writing center development and management, and writing program coordinator. Andy, if you want to give a hand raise there. So Dr. Andy Cavanaugh coordinates the upper level technical writing class at UMGC, as well as the 200 level professional writing class and the 200 level academic writing class. He holds an ED in instructional technology from Towson University. He serves as assistant technology coordinator for the Association for Business Communication and as co-chair of the English Affinity Group for the Purvis Transfer Council of the University System of Maryland. Sarah, you want to give a hand raise? Dr. Sarah Felber is the Director of Writing Across the Curriculum at UMGC and co-editor of the Journal of College Reading and Learning. Sarah holds a PhD in linguistics. Anne Marie. Dr. Anne Marie Hubbell coordinates, manages, and teaches the upper level academic writing course at UMGC. Her research interests include the study of women and humor, the impact of technology on online learning, the use of performance in daily life, and the interplay between student writing and culture. She holds a PhD in performance studies. And Janine, last but not least, Dr. Janine Williams leads the Writing Across the Curriculum program at UMGC. She is a scholar, practitioner, activist, whose work focuses on issues of identity, cultural and linguistic diversity, culturally responsive teaching, critical literacy, and social justice. Janine holds a PhD in language, literacy, and culture. So with that, we are going to get started. Please, if you have not done so and you just came on, please add your full name as well as your organization or institution in the chat box. And also, as we walk through or we go through the presentation today, please post any questions that you have in the chat, and I will read them to the panel at the end of the presentation. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started.
I'm going to share my screen here. And so you have all, you know who all of us are, all working together at the Writing Across the Curriculum program at University of Maryland Global Campus. We're going to be discussing some pilot work that we've done in kind of rethinking and revamping the way that we do assessment in the writing program at UMGC. And I'm going to pass it now to Janine to start with some background.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. And just a slight correction. So Sarah is now the director of Writing Across the Curriculum, and I'm the former director. And so in that role, I guess about 1.5 years ago, we decided to engage in we wanted to talk about the current professional dialogue. There's a lot that has been talked about in terms of anti-racist teaching, linguistic justice, those things we've seen come out of 4Cs and other organizations. And so as a group, the 5 of us, we read several things, which you have a list here on the screen. So we read an old piece, The Students Write to Their Own Language. We read the most recent statement by foresees on linguistic justice. And we also just looked at some more practical things like what Rutgers University English department was doing in terms of addressing anti-racism. And then we also read 2 research articles that talked about anti-racism and linguistic justice in the classroom specifically. And with that, we wanted to reflect on our courses and think about ways in which we might implement these ideas. And as you'll find out a little bit more about our context, it's very non-traditional, if you will. And so it was a little bit of a challenge, but Jim Booth actually kind of led us to labor-based grading just in his own additional research regarding the articles that we read. And we began to see labor-based grading as kind of a practical step towards anti-racism and linguistic justice in our courses.
Okay, so as Janine mentioned, figuring out how to implement what we wanted to in our own context was a lot of the work that we had to do. A lot of what we read talked about courses where it was individual professors in charge of their own class and had a lot of autonomy and ability to do whatever they wanted almost. And we're in a quite different context. At UMGC, first of all, our students, we have adult students, over 60% are military affiliated. So, active duty military spouses or veterans, and over 50% minority students. I believe about half of those, so 25% of our students are African-American. We're in a very large online context. Our courses are online and hybrid, but majority fully online. And because we have so many students in so many locations taught by a large faculty, our courses are designed at the program level. It's a central design model, and most of our faculty who teach those courses are adjuncts. So we had to figure out how to fit into that framework what we wanted to implement in a way that would work for this large group of people. We have about 48,000 undergraduate students, and our writing courses serve most of them. So students are going to take, unless they have transferred in something equivalent, they're going to take our 100 level academic writing course. They're going to take some selection of our upper level writing courses to fill general education requirements. It's for the purposes of presenting, and we also talk about them this way in other contexts sometimes, we've divided our courses into 2 categories. The academic writing courses, which are 2 sequence 100 level academic writing, our 200 level slightly more advanced academic writing, and then our 300 level advanced research writing. And then our second category are the professional writing courses, our 200 level professional writing, and then our 300 level writing 393 is our 300 level technical writing course, and writing 394 is our business writing course. So we'll be talking about the courses in those categories later on. So we decided, well, we had to do some planning. How are we going to implement the ideas of labor-based grading in our courses? And you'll hear more as we move on about what those basic ideas are. But the first thing that we looked at was reworking our rubrics to assess students' completion of assigned tasks. So we felt that working within rubrics was a constraint that we had. Our school uses rubrics. They were going to be maintained in our classes. So how can we work within that framework to assess students' labor? Whereas our previous rubrics might have had levels like fair or poor, fair, average, good, excellent, where instructors were using more subjective criteria to assess students' completion of the work. We really tried to focus on, did students complete what we asked them to complete or not? And professors were still going to be giving feedback on how work could be improved. But we wanted the grades, as part of what labor-based grading is, to be based on students' labor towards what they were asked to do. We considered completion of all of the assigned tasks to be sufficient to earn a grade of B. So, it's not necessarily exceptional to just do the things you asked to do. So we said, all right, that would be a grade of B. And then to earn an A, students should do some extra things. And so that's how we originally conceived of this. how we would set up these models. So to pilot this idea, we started with our own sections that we were teaching. So within the Writing Across the Curriculum full-time faculty and staff, there are 7 of us, and we were all doing some teaching. So we, in those sections, tried this out. That was our first semester, about a year ago. And we completed that semester, made some adjustments, and then extended to a small group of active faculty members. So we said, who do we think would be open to this? People that we trust and thought that would understand what we were trying to get at and be good at giving us feedback. And then we did one semester like that. And then the next semester, we decided to open this to any faculty members who were interested. And the benefit of this, besides just expanding our pilot, was the beginning of a socialization process. Because by making this announcement, here's something we're trying, who wants to participate? Everybody's getting a chance to start hearing about it, to start hearing about this project, so to prepare them for an eventual expansion. And throughout this pilot process, we were collecting feedback through our own self-reflection, through student surveys that we inserted in the LMS in the online classroom. We created Microsoft Forum for faculty to provide feedback, and then other forums for just open-ended discussion. And so we had a continuous feedback and revision cycle for the classes themselves. So I'm going to pass it back to now Janine and Anne-Marie, who are going to talk about more specifically the implementation in the academic writing classes.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. So implementation of labor-based grading in academic writing, and just to recap, the academic writing courses are kind of our first year writing, our freshman comp courses, and as well as our advanced research writing course, which Anne-Marie coordinates. And so what it looked like in this class, we kind of had 3, I guess, hallmarks of labor-based grading in academic writing. The first is that feedback is divorced from grading. So as Sarah was describing, and as you'll see in our next slide, we'll show a rubric. Students are graded on whether or not they completed the task. Not necessarily how well they completed the task, but their grade is based on whether or not they completed the task. But then the students still receive feedback on what they could do to improve their writing or their performance on the assignment, and then students will then engage that feedback through some revision to, I guess, do that additional labor, if you will, or to earn the additional points to raise their grade from that baseline of a B up to an A. We also included a strong reflective component. And so for the 100 level writing courses, with each assignment that students turn in, they answer 4 reflective questions. So kind of a self-assessment, if you will, of their assignment, where they talk about what their strengths are, like what they were particularly proud of, where they found, where they were challenged with the assignment, and where they could use some additional support from the instructor. We asked them about their language choices. So what were they trying to achieve? And then we also asked them about any additional goals they may have had for the assignment outside of the goals that were set by the instructor. And so that kind of, creates more of a look into the students' kind of metacognitive process, or their thought process in doing the work. And then the third kind of hallmark is how we are just kind of reframing grammar. So students still receive instruction on punctuation and those kinds of things, but we really wanted to talk about grammar in terms of language choices and taking a more rhetorical approach. And so we moved from our rubrics that looked at spelling and punctuation and all that, and we kind of have 2 categories now, which are style and readability. We wanted to think about the function of grammar more so than specific rules, and just kind of start a conversation with students around that.
This is the rubric from the upper level academic writing course. However, the language, particularly in this section, was inspired by the lower level, introductory level academic writing. As you can see, the rubric categories are straightforward, focused on labor. Instructors focus on whether the labor is complete, incomplete, or absence. And as was mentioned, as the rubrics were developed, we were trying very hard to eliminate subjectivity from the criteria as much as possible. As Jeanine mentioned, the assessment focuses on the language choices made by the student. So the students are encouraged to consider the rhetorical effects of their own writing. And grading is focused on whether students did the labor, did they in good faith attempt to address the feedback. It's focused on the process of writing rather than the product. Next slide, please. So in the lower level academic writing courses, as Jeanine mentioned, the assignments are set up to create a conversation between the students and the instructor. So, and as she mentioned, one of the assignments includes a series of questions about the choices students made in their writing. One of the great things about this is that students can talk about their response to the feedback and talk about why they made or didn't make particular writing choices, which I think is wonderful. In the upper level writing courses, the reflections are formalized in short papers. And this kind of critical reflection allows instructors to engage students as they're making writing choices. So for example, in my most recent course, I had a student who was focusing on developing a literature review around food insecurity and the effects on school-aged children. As I read over her revision plan that she developed as part of the additional labor, I learned that she was becoming interested in how this problem was impacting local communities in Maryland, particularly the Latino community. So as we began communicating about this issue, I was able to encourage her to investigate that particular aspect of it in more depth and incorporate a category of that into her literature review. In her final essay reflection, she indicated that she'd been inspired to join some local community active groups to address that, which I thought was terrific. Aseo Inoue, in his discussion of labor-based grading, talks about developing a community of compassion in the writing classroom. And he states that part of developing that community was doing things for each other. I was really inspired by this, so I wanted to offer an opportunity for students to develop presentations to teach their fellow students about ideas that we are exploring in the class. Next slide, please. So here's an example of a student presentation. These students develop these presentations using credible sources, APA, as well as their own ideas about what will help their fellow students. As you can see, the student is providing advice on how to synthesize, how to begin or implement and organize that process. Next slide, please.
Okay, so some things that we learned, again, that students can make intentional choices about their language, and that, you know, when we present it to them in terms of style and readability, it seems that they are more in tune to those choices, you know, being, again, intentional, purposeful in how they're using language, as opposed to just trying to memorize and follow rules, but really understanding the role of language in their writing. We see that there seems to be an increased student agency where students can decide if they want to do additional labor. You know, some students decide, you know what, I'm fine with my baseline of a B, or I don't have time in my life this week to do the extra post or something like that. And so there's a greater student agency there where they have that freedom. I would also say there's agency too in something like language choices. You know, they're not just trying to appease the instructor and this kind of, you know, imaginary perfect product that the instructor supposedly have. The student can decide and make choices and take ownership of their writing in beautiful ways, in ways that I think we as instructors hope that our students do, but we never really created the conditions, I think, you know, under which students could make those choices. And I feel like labor-based grading is moving us more in that direction. It's definitely more flexible and appropriate for adult learners. You know, as Sarah mentioned, our context, we have students who may be deployed and all kinds of things. And so this gives them the opportunity to still put forth sufficient labor to get it a decent grade, but, you know, they can decide when they want to do the extra to, you know, to get the A grade, or when they may have to taper back a little bit. And so it is flexible for them. One of the things we also learned too is that just kind of this clarity and simplicity are important in the course requirements. And so over our kind of iterations of the pilot, we have learned how to, I think, better word our rubrics, better word our assignment instructions, better communicate the requirements with the faculty who are trying this new way, and kind of simplify it even in our own minds as kind of the creators of this. In our context, the four of us have even had to think about how we can clarify and simplify it in our own minds so that we can implement it effectively.
Well, here are some of the challenges that arose in the process. So some students were nervous about the new grading process, which is understandable. And often that was just a conversation. I did notice that I had one or two students who were advanced writers. They were really good at it, and they were frustrated by the idea of having to do extra labor when they were already doing good writing. So as a result, I would talk to them about the fact that the critically reflective extra labor was only going to improve their process. It was only going to make them better at what they were already good at. Sometimes instructors have difficulty reconciling the tension between students developing quote unquote academic writing or use of APA and a labor-based approach to grading. So what if the student isn't using perfect APA citation, or what if they're using informal language or colloquial language? Focusing on the process, the labor, allows the instructor to meet the student where they're at in the writing process, which is really useful. So the focus becomes not how do I get the student to write an A paper, the sort of imaginary A paper that many instructors have in their head, including me, but how to help the student critically reflect on their writing concerns and choices. How do I help the student make choices that will make their message clearer? And indeed, what can I learn from their student language choices? What am I learning? That's it.
Right, we're going to transition now to discussion of the professional writing courses with Jim and Andy.
Hi, everyone. Some of the things that we learned in professional writing, and professional writing sort of has different focus than academic writing, in that we are trying to teach people particularly pragmatic ways of managing language in order to accomplish tasks. What we found in the business writing course that I coordinate is that in no way was the ability of a professional writing professor affected by the switch to labor-based grading. We could still talk to them about the same sorts of elements that are important in professional writing, such as audience analysis and consideration, style in business or technical writing. Andy, anything you want to add there?
I'm going to get into more agency when you get to the third bullet. So okay. Go ahead.
A second thing that we discovered, or at least that I discovered in business writing, is that students were more receptive to feedback. They found it more formative, I think, rather than thinking of feedback as the way to a grade. They thought of feedback as real suggestions for ways in which they could take risks and expand their writing choices. And they were willing to do more in terms of revision and take more risks because the reduction in stress about their grades. They knew that by doing the labor, they would be achieving their grade. And so they were willing to take more chances with their writing. A third element, students did like the agency given them in choosing the grade they worked toward. Now, in professional writing, we allow students to choose a grade, and they have a document that lets them see what the requirements are for any given grade from A through D, and they can choose how much work they want to do. As you would guess, most of them choose A and B, and they like that agency, and they like the idea that they can change their grade choice for 7 of the 8 weeks of our course terms. For the reasons that Janine mentioned, with adult students, and particularly with military students, their circumstances can change suddenly and precipitately. And so being able to make a change in their grade choice was they found that very appealing and beneficial. Andy, you wanted to add something?
Sure. With regard to the technical writing course, we, at the beginning of the pilot, we did ask
Andy, you're
students
going
to
in and out.
choose what grade they were going to pursue. Okay. My internet is unstable according to a message I just got. So are you not hearing me?
Yes, we're hearing you now.
Gotcha. Let me keep going. And in writing 393, which is the technical writing course, we initially in the pilot asked students to choose what grade in the beginning of the course they'd like to pursue, A or B. As we continued the pilot, we did not follow that process. We simply laid out what an A or B or C or other grades would involve, and they saw that arrangement. With regard to agency, though, technical writing has some things that are simply kind of cut and dried, but other certain assignments have more, I say, cut and dried issues, and other assignments involve more expression or individual approaches or creativity. To give an example, if students write a set of instructions, which is writing assignment number 2, and the writing assignment number 1 is they have to write 3 personas for those set of instructions, there's certain things, each step has to start with an imperative verb. Each step really should have a graphic. The graphic really should be labeled. Graphics really should be aligned and somewhat consistent in their style. There should be proximity applied so that the instruction is close to the graphic. And see, so that if a student submits this set of instructions and the instructor points out some shortcomings in this area, the student has to revise and address those issues. The student doesn't really have agency there. The student can't say, well, I don't want to start my steps with an imperative verb, or my style is to have my graphic far away from my instructions. Now, the student, the agency doesn't operate in that way. In that respect, the student does have to respond to the guidelines from the instructor, which are really following technical writing, principles. However, there are other assignments that do involve more student agency, and I wanted to give one example. The report to the supervisor is writing assignment 4 in the technical writing course. We give the student a scenario, and they have to write a report. They're an employee in a company. Their supervisor is Richard, and they have to write a report to Richard on some problems they've observed. I had a student this past semester who submitted her report to the supervisor, and I told her that she was really being quite ambitious. She was telling Richard to do lots of things that really were a little bit beyond the scenario. And I felt she was asking him to do a lot, in the sense that he was not a person who was an expert in a lot of these fields. She responded saying, my approach was based on the complete scenario involving all 10 employees in the IT department, not just the 3 that are mentioned in the scenario. And she mentioned why she wanted him to write a business continuity plan and a PCI security standards assessment. She ended up getting an A in the paper and a 96 on the paper, because she had that agency. I still disagreed with her. I still thought that she was a little ambitious in telling Richard what to do, but she defended her report to Richard in a sound way. And I'll get into more. That's a writing assignment example. I'll get into some discussion topic issues later in a future slide, but go ahead, Jim.
Yeah. Finally, in writing 394, the business writing course that I coordinate, we use 2 reflection assignments. They are short memos that students write to me as the professor or to their professor, and they discuss in the midterm reflection, they discuss what their experiences are and what they're finding interesting, beneficial, or challenging about the experience they're having with labor-based grading. In the final reflection, they consider all those things sort of in retrospect, and then they also are allowed to propose recommendations and improvements. And since business writing we tend to focus on proposals for changes to policy, changes to equipment usage, all sorts of business sort of topics. They find that very connected to the sort of writing that they've been doing in the course, and they readily propose recommendations for the course. And we try to implement those as often as we can to show students that their writing has agency. Next slide. Andy?
Yeah, so upon looking into this further, we noticed Tracy Gardner is a professor at Virginia Tech who teaches a form of labor-based grading in her technical writing classes. And I'll show you a screen capture of one of her graphics. But one point I wanted to mention is the rubric for the discussion topics was significantly changed as a result of our move to labor-based grading in technical writing. But in terms of the impact on writing assignments, I would really need additional data. The first pilot had too few students in it, and the second pilot, I'm still kind of gathering from my own and other colleagues' experiences. But Sarah, if you go to the next slide, this is the right now. If you can't see this, that's okay. But this is the rubric for the discussion topics in technical writing. And now students are graded on whether they responded to every question. That's the first criterion. Whether they responded with 70 words or more and with certain relevant content, and that's described in the class, and whether their response was on time. Also, to respond to one peer, it's very quantitative, 40 words or more, and whether their response to the peer was on time. I'm getting another message that my internet connection is unstable. I'll just keep going. Sarah, go ahead and hit the advanced screen again, because there's going to be another graphic come up. This is what they have to do in responding to a peer. They have to respond with a question, an expansion on what the peer said, or a cordial disagreement. So now everything is cut and dried. If they responded to everything on time with relevant content and they responded to a peer, they get full credit. If you think 70 words is kind of a low bar, you're probably right. We're working on this right now, figuring out whether we should have a greater than 70 words in response to the initial post. These will be tweaks that we will make in future semesters, but there's a very quantitative approach to this. And if you go to the next slide, Sarah, this is one more advanced. This is Tracy Gardner's website. And what I like about what she has here and is specifically points 1, 3, 4, and 5, the focus on ideas, not mistakes, the opportunity to take risks and not to play it safe, the opportunity to do over an assignment with no penalty, and to put in the effort, no pain, no gain. That's really the spirit we want students to approach the technical writing course with. Point number 2, write for yourself, not for me. Again, I think that depends on the assignment. Sometimes you have to write for the user in technical writing, not for yourself. But that's a discussion we'll continue to have as we consider this approach. I just do want to mention one example with a discussion topic in my class. Students were supposed to analyze 2 websites for alignment and contrast. Some students were responding, writing that a particular website, one of the websites had better alignment than the other. I didn't agree with them. I thought that website did not have good alignment, and I responded to everybody showing why the alignment in that particular website was problematic according to some of the resources in our class. Everybody who responded on time got full credit. They simply got feedback from me saying, this is something to consider in the area of alignment. I do want to say that in discussion topics, if you respond to the student and ask a question and the student doesn't respond to you, then the student hasn't done the labor there, and there would be points deducted for that. But that's the way one particular discussion topic worked. But I do want to mention, just overall, there's an objectivity to grading in some cases. If an assignment asks, in a particular report, like I mentioned to the supervisor for a memo, if I think the memo should be approached differently from the way the student wrote it, I can make a suggestion to the student, but I don't fail the memo because the student didn't write it the way I would have written it. We're taking we're taking criteria as objective as possible and grading the student on the labor he or she puts in. Go ahead, Sarah, you can advance to the next one.
And that brings us to the challenges that we've faced in professional writing, and Andy's just mentioned one of them. I just had a meeting yesterday with the Writing 394 faculty, the Advanced Business Writing faculty, in which we talked about this very issue of using a rubric to assess a student's assignment completion writing based on the completion of the labor that was requested, rather than traditional assessment based on the faculty member's ideal assignment concept, which Andy just gave us a wonderful example of. If the approach the student took is not the approach that the instructor might have taken, that makes no difference in terms of the student completing the labor. So that's one of the challenges that we faced is helping faculty understand that there's a different mindset, and that, as Anne Marie mentioned in a much earlier slide, it's important that students come to understand that the feedback that they're getting is not directly affecting their grade. The feedback that they're getting is encouraging them to rethink their approach to the management of a writing task. So, which is a very good thing because it focuses the student on the process of writing. Andy, anything you want to add there?
And well, as the next bullet talks about line by line grammar feedback, and this is something I'm still working with my own classes, and we'll be working with faculty. If I tell a student that he has a sentence fragment in the second draft, he doesn't address it, I would argue that the student in that case has not put in the labor. And I would deduct some points, not I mean maybe a half point or something like that for one sentence fragment. But how to deal with micro level issues in writing in a labor-based format is something that I and my colleagues are still working with in the technical writing class. And so I just wanted to point that out with regard to that second bullet on the slide.
Yep. And go ahead.
Sorry, I jumped the gun.
Go ahead, Sarah.
Well, did you have something to?
Well, I was just going to add that, one approach that we've taken in advanced business writing is to talk to people about, the levels of error. As Andy talks about mentioned micro issues with grammar or punctuation, that sort of writing level. Major issues such as, problems with sentence fragments, run-on sentences, real readability issues. Those would need, those would be what we're trying to help faculty focus on to make sure that students are addressing both that part of the rubric and the higher level concerns in terms of readability. And so next, you can move on, Sarah.
Okay. So you've heard how we planned this pilot project, some of the steps of our implementation, and then the experiences we had throughout the pilot project in our academic writing courses and our professional writing courses. We also faced some challenges at an institutional level related to the context that we laid out before. So because we are in a situation where we're teaching online in under constraints imposed through various administrative initiatives and projects that impacted our ability to carry through with our plans as we had originally conceived them. So we became aware just a few months ago that it might not be possible for us to continue piloting our courses and adjusting them in the way that we had planned because of some higher level projects coming from the upper administration that were going to affect our ability to physically implement in our online classes the piloting process. And so we had to kind of pivot fairly quickly and ask ourselves, what can we say from our piloting so far has been successful enough to go ahead and roll it out to all of our sections of a particular course in the summer semester. So this was not necessarily our original plan of how to follow our timeline, but we were able to identify certain aspects of our piloting that we felt, yes, this has been successful, ready to go. And so the core of what we're able to do that with was the levels of the rubrics. So the way of setting up a rubric where it's following very closely the requirements of an assignment and where the levels are complete, incomplete, absent, focusing on whether a student has done that labor, we found was successful. And we were able to add that to our classes across the board. Something that was a little less clear was how we implemented what we have called throughout this presentation, things like the additional labor or the A-level labor. How we present that varied across our courses, and we found that sometimes some ways of presenting it caused some difficulty or confusion. For example, calling something additional work or additional labor felt confusing to students if they needed to do that in order to get an A. So they said, if that is needed for that grade of A, then why are you telling me it's extra or additional? And so we were able to make some adjustments to the presentation of those requirements in some courses and go ahead and introduce them to all of the sections of our courses. And then in other courses, we need to slow down and take some more time to figure out how to implement that. So the result is that coming up in our summer semester, which is going to start shortly, we have many aspects of this labor-based grading pilot that we are introducing across our program. And we're in the process of acclimating our faculty to those new components and doing some training, allowing people to ask questions, and also continuing to gather feedback and think about as we become able again to try out new things and pilot new approaches, what are things that we would want to do to continue learning from the experiences that we've all had. So overall, I think that despite facing some challenges both at the course level and at the university level, we've been able to, I think, make some really good progress on this project, which we think supports our students, provides more equity for our students, and just provides a strong learning environment. So that is the conclusion of our presentation. I'm going to stop and see if there are questions or comments.
Hello, everyone. Please feel free to type your questions in the chat. Okay. First question from Julie for the panel is feedback given in writing or by other means?
I can start with that, and then people might have something to add. So there's variation among our faculty in how they provide feedback. I would say there's usually at least a written component, and that could be we have a few different tools that are available for writing comments directly on a student paper. And there's ways to, you can add comments to the rubric itself. So there's a few different places that written feedback can be provided. I know that most of, maybe all of us in this, giving this presentation also use to some degree video feedback. And we encourage our faculty to do that as well and try to help give them the tools and understanding to do that, but it's not a universal across our program.
Okay, the next question comes in from Wendy. How long does each rubric take to develop?
Does anyone want to speak to that about
Do you-
experiences on developing rubrics?
Do you mean how long does each rubric assignment take to grade using the rubric, or how long does it take to develop the rubric? I just want to make sure.
So she says, how long does each rubric take to develop? So I'm thinking she means the actual rubric.
Yeah, the actual development of the rubric, because you put a few up on the screen and there's, I mean, I'm just thinking they're really extensive.
The discussion topic rubric I showed you, I actually enjoyed creating that because it's the kind of, it allowed me to break everything down into, did you respond to every question? Did you respond with enough content? Did you respond on time? So I can't say it took a long time to create the rubric. Tweaking word count and what I'm looking for in the response and the response to the peer, I mean, that took some time, but I'll stop there and ask any other of my colleagues to.
I think one thing that's worth mentioning is that all of these assignments already had rubrics, and the amount that they had to be changed for this project differed a little bit from one to the next. So in some cases, it was fairly straightforward of just changing the levels, like taking out the bare, average, good, and changing it to complete, incomplete, absent. And then in some cases, there was a little bit more adjustment required. So I don't know that there's, I'm sorry, I don't have a really good answer to how long it really takes, because it also depends on a lot of developing the rubric is entering the rubric in the LMS. And so it depends on the familiarity with the tool and what the tool is and all of that.
Great. So the next question is from Amy Shea. What is the best way to stay organized and keep track of various students' data?
Amy, do you want to say more what you mean about their data?
Is my microphone on?
Mhm.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. My question came to mind when one of the presenters mentioned a sentence level, like a comma splice that a student had in one document, and then the next one, if the student had another comma splice, it was sort of like a half point like taken off. And I'm thinking if you have a certain number, many students who have various types of errors, and I mean, how do you track all of the data coming in a way? I mean, I guess I'm thinking of specifications grading where there might be tokens or things like that. Do you have any sort of system that differs from the traditional way that you had been grading before?
Thank you, Amy, for that clarification. We do everything through our LMS. And so I know for 100 level writing, to look at how a student may or may not have changed things from a first draft, if they go back and address the feedback and do some revision, we do ask students to use strike through and boldface to indicate any changes. So, we don't have physical papers, where we have to pick up the old one. But, you can really easily see, and students submit in the same assignment folder. So if it's assignment 1, I'll see the student's initial submission, and then maybe a week or so later, I'll see the student's second submission. And we do ask them to kind of annotate. And then also there's some reflection questions where we ask them what they did and, how they address the feedback. We also ask them, at least at 100 level writing, what feedback did you not address and why? So that kind of helps us keep track. I hope that answers your question, at least some.
It does. Thank you very much.
Okay, a comment from Cindy Schmidt. The information seems really clear. And then from Phyllis, is there a juncture where there is a need to move past labor-based grading to provide empirical assessment on quality of work and content it contains?
I think some of what Andy was talking about gets at that a little bit, about, there's a point when the part of the labor is you have to do this specific thing that I've told you, it wasn't meeting the criteria before and it needs to. But I understand the question also in terms of that it's coming from perhaps not a writing course. If you're outside a writing course, then you have content that's separate from the teaching of the writing itself. Within our writing courses, yes, it's possible for a student to be submitting something that we as the faculty recognize as inaccurate information. But for the most part, what's happening in our writing courses is not the students telling us information where we as faculty are easily able to say, yes, that's accurate, or no, it's not. Because we're teaching the writing process, we're looking at, did you present this? Did you follow that process and present this in a way that shows your process, shows your sources back up your claim, seem to back up your claims? So I think it's a little bit of a different animal. But does anybody else have comments on that?
A student just this past week submitted to me a report for technical writing about remote operation of forklifts, because in the age of COVID, there's not enough workers who can come into the factory, a warehouse, to operate forklifts. So there's this remote, control of. I really don't know whether this is feasible on a large scale. I'm not familiar with the technology on remote control of forklifts, but he had good sources and it was a very creative argument and he got an A. He fulfilled the labor and the requirements for that assignment, the white paper. So if that's what you mean by the content, I'm not an expert on this field. I can't comment on the content. But I can comment on the quality of sources he used and the approach he took. That's just one example I could give.
Does that answer your question, Phyllis? Let's see. So I think you touched on this before, Sarah, but have you also tried voice thread or audio feedback? And that comes from Cindy.
I can personally say I provide mostly audio feedback in my feedback across the board throughout the semester.
But and I had mentioned before video feedback. So I usually use screencast video feedbacks so that the student's paper is on the screen and I'm speaking as I scroll through it. And often I've written some notes on the paper before I do that, so that as I go through, I can explain, okay, here I put a little star here, let me explain what it's about, something like that.
Great, thank you. From Eileen Harden, can you share a sample of assignment instructions and rubrics so we can see the level of clarity you are providing?
Eileen, if you want to contact us after, we can. I don't have it ready to put up on the screen now. But yeah, the bits of rubrics that you saw before were just bits of rubrics. So yeah, if you wanted to look at something more complete, we could share that.
And we will share contact information at the end of the presentation. So next question from Anne. Do you have any recommendations or examples of people using labor-based grading in other disciplines? That's her first question. And I had an interesting conversation with a science faculty this week about how her students can work really, really hard and still get it wrong, as far as the need to factualize correctness, etc., in the sciences. And I don't think that precludes the use of labor-based grading, but I need some research to back me up.
like to know more about that as well. And so I think that it is something that I'd like to know more. I don't have a resource to offer right now. But one of the things that we have discussed ourselves, which I think is a similar thing to keep in mind for other disciplines that are in our institutional context, our classes are 8 weeks long. And so for us, it's really most beneficial to think of the development that's taking place in a course. And not only was this particular product attained at a exact standard, because students are going to be starting from different places. And so when you have students starting from different places, expecting them to arrive at the same place after only 8 weeks is not realistic. And so that's one thing that I would consider in other disciplines, is what's realistic to consider as appropriate achievement in the amount of time that's been given.
Thanks, Sarah. The next question, Deborah McLaughlin. Could you say more how labor-based writing can support equity? We often think about preparing our students with foundation skills rather than supporting our students by asking them to engage in additional metacognitive learning activities.
Well, I don't know, Janine, did you want to comment on that? It ties in well with your slide, or I can comment if you want.
Sure, I can at least start with the comment. So in terms of equity, I guess when we think about writing and we think about writing standards, in relation to the larger professional conversation around anti-racism and linguistic justice, well, there are some communicative or linguistic styles that are marginalized, and even in some cases demonized, if we really, to just kind of be frank about it. And so one of the ways that labor-based writing, or labor-based grading addresses that is that the student's grade is separate from perhaps my own, I guess, biased perceptions of language and language use. So a student can put forth the labor to do the assignment, get feedback, in relation to how things might be improved, or how things might be better aligned with what we, perceive as academic writing. So again, it just kind of separates those conversations. Here's your grade. You're not being penalized by an arbitrary standard that may marginalize you for reasons beyond your control. But here are some ways to think about what writing typically looks like in an academic context. So it just gives a more nuanced conversation where a student isn't, I think, unnecessarily penalized. I hope I explained that. It makes sense in my mind, but I don't know if it came out clearly.
And if I can add to it, I think that one of the questions within writing that often comes up in this conversation is whether a labor-based grading approach or related equity initiatives are depriving students of access to a so-called standard language, or the language of business, or the language of academics. And we absolutely do not want to deprive students of access. We really focus on student control and student choice, so that they can understand what is out there in the world. They can understand how people react to language and to writing choices. And with that knowledge, they can make informed choices and critical analysis. So we think of it as really additive to what's available to the student as opposed to taking away.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Janine. And one more question. We're right at the hour, but from Phyllis, what challenges have been overcome to create the scaffolding timing needs for the assignments within 8-week course cycles at UMGC?
I can speak to 100 level writing. When I first came on, that was one of the things that I was tasked with doing for 100 level writing. And so did like a backwards mapping. So we have kind of this target assignment that is due at the end of the course. And then every like kind of benchmark assignment, every discussion, everything leads into that. And so I think that was, that's been the approach, and that's been very effective. So everything that the student does in those 8 weeks is related to that target assignment. And so that scaffolding is just built into the course itself.
Thank you, Janine. And I'm going to share the last slide. For some reason, I'm not seeing it. Oh, here we go. It's not cooperating. Thank you all for sharing today. And I know I learned a lot from this session. So thank you so much. And here is the title slide, all of the title of the session, as well as all of the names listed here. Please reach out to any of them, I assume, if you have additional questions.
Yeah,
That's a great
we're
session.
always happy to get questions and have discussions about any of this. So thanks for attending.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take care.